Namaste, angels. Thank you for joining, liking, sharing, subscribing, all the stuff that you do for my channel and for me. I greatly appreciate it. I got to tell you, actually, YouTube contacted me again. I think it's in response to an old inquiry that I had put into them, but they responded to me again this week about people not getting their notifications. And they were right on time, to be honest, because I've been kind of lacking and slacking with that. I've gotten lazy about it, of having to remember to post something on all of my social media app to say I've posted a video. You know, it's a pretty big endeavor. So I do need you guys to be the ones to, share it with a friend that you know is interested in this sort of thing. Queen of Swords put up in the video, or to share the actual video or whatever, to help me in that area. But they sent me some instructions, so I'll try to take a screenshot of that and post it in my YouTube feed where they let us put the pics and stuff. For anybody who's still having trouble with receiving their notifications, at least from my channel. You may get everybody else's notifications, but mine, and we know why you don't get mine, right? That there are things working against me and people like me. People, I have to put loosely, I'm not human. People like me and the content that I put up, because it doesn't promote like the lies and the inaccuracies and, because I do know the prophecies and I talk about the actual prophecies and stuff. I see a lot of people lately in their titles in their video, in that same feed, where we put the pics or where the videos show up, like, on the side recommended and stuff like that. People with the word prophecies in their title, like they're going to talk about the prophecies, and these are it's like out of nowhere. Like, you've been on YouTube for how long? You just now talking about the prophecies? It's people trying to jump on the ship, as they say, the bandwagon, and, make some money off of divine unions, or twin flames. I am not one to allow that. I'm going to continue to fight that, because that's part of our purpose. That's part of our purpose, to, fight the bullshit. There's going to be people, if you look at any of these prophecies in any of the cultures, but particularly, of course, the Abrahamic religions, Christianity, Judaism, Islam, they all speak of not only false prophets that come, but some that are, pretty believable, that they're good people. So we have to be super, super, super discerning. And then there's levels to, what you believe about that, happens if we're not super discerning, other than the obvious, whatever one goes through as a consequence of not being as careful as they should. But in the Bible, so for those who are Christian or formerly Christian, you probably remember this, in the Bible, there is punishment even for those people who mistakenly followed, somebody of the dark. You didn't mean to, it was an accident. You tried to be discerning, but you failed. There's punishment for those people too. It's lesser, the way it's described, but, it exists. So, and I'm not saying I necessarily believe that or don't, but we do know that punishment does come in many forms. Again, when we make mistakes, sometimes we pay for them. Even if it was something completely accidental, we pay a price. Sometimes that price is more severe than others. So there you go. There's punishment. In any event, that's that. And if my voice wavers or whatever, those of you who are aware that I was in the hospital, I just took off those bracelets, by the way. I was like, okay, you're out of control now. You're ridiculous. You must get up and find a scissor or a knife or something. I ended up using my serrated knife from the kitchen. I couldn't find anything. But that's why I don't have my rings on, because I still was too lazy to get them out of the bag. And this was the best Band-Aid. I've taken, I don't know how many showers in the meantime. I just took the Band-Aid off. I took off the braces. I'm like, all right, cool. And then I was like, come on. What are you doing? You still got that on. But it stayed on. I need a box of those. What else I want to tell you guys aside from this? Oh, I still recommend if you have not seen it and you feel that you might be a knight, or you saw my moon reading and that gave you any kind of tingles or whatever, particularly the past life spread that I did as part of the moon reading, which is still, that reading is still timely, by the way. We have not yet had the next moon will be the Cancer new moon. So the full moon, the Sagittarius full moon, is, that video is the video that will take us into the Cancer new moon. So, you have until then to watch for the energies. And then you can watch it anytime. Like, if people do stumble upon it and watch it at some other time, I think that there's a purpose for that too. There's a reason for that, why we're led to things. And so, go ahead, still watch it, and forget about the time. They're not constraints. They're just like suggestions, recommended. I recommend that, and I've asked when I do the reading that my ancestors and the angels and any entities that, of the light that want to give me the messages, I recommend they give me them for a 2-week period. That's what I ask for when I do it. So that's that. But anyway, if you got any kind of tingles or feels or whatever, when I did particularly the past life spread and started talking about the knights and the farms and everything, I do recommend that you watch the video that I did about the Templar Knights. This is many, many, many different kinds of knights. But after I did that reading, I was shown that the knights that I had seen, not only in the cards, but in vision that I had prior to the reading and after the reading, were specifically the Templar Knights, which it seems were made up of people who believed and followed Christ, but not Christians in the sense that we are. It was clearly, to me, very, very different prior to King James and his Bible. King James, which gives me bad feels in general. But that's a whole other story. Yeah. And this was definitely before King James and his Bible. This is in the year 1119. And those of you who've been watching me for, any elongated period of time know what the number 1119 means to me and my viewers. And that I've been talking about the year 2019 since 2016 and saying it's going to be an 1119, and I just feel, something happening. I don't know what yet, but something forward moving happening that year. And as we get closer to it, especially my Patreon viewers, like those who are with me like every day, we just, the feeling is building up of something's coming, and we're like, the excitement is building up, and we see interesting changes. That's why I mentioned the fact that I was in the hospital. I was going to say, if my voice wavers, it's because, yes, I was in the hospital. It was for a 9/11 survivor like myself, with what I, connected to that. They were routine tests. However, they did require me to go to the hospital, and one of the things that I had to endure was to have tubes down my throat. So that's why my voice is a little bit weird. It's got my train of thought. Oh yeah, so we've just been really feeling that something's happening 1119, and again, 2019 is 1119. I think that one of the things that is happening is that the Templar Knights, those of us who were one, or maybe we were on the other side, maybe we were fighting them, maybe we were the people who believed that was our land and we didn't want anybody fighting over it, because it started in Jerusalem. I think we're being called back together. It's like, it's 1119 again, rally the troops. And I think that's why I was showing all that stuff about them. So hopefully I'll continue to get messages. It will continue to become more clear. But, that's why I think it's important. Anywho, let's get to what's going on this week. This is the general reading. Thanks again for joining me for the period of June 23rd, Sunday, June 23rd, through Saturday, June 29th. On the Christian calendar, on the 24th is the first day that I'm going to talk about. It's the feast day of St. John the Baptist. So for me, that is also a special day personally. That is the day on which I got my name. I have an African name. I have African American parents. My mother's also Native, but actually I have the Native American on both sides. But it's closer, and I know like what type, and I know what type on my father's side too, but I know like from where it comes, like what person, and all of that on my mother's side. So on my father's side, we Blackfoot Indian, and from Virginia, and on my mother's side, Cherokee from South Carolina, and also Catawba, also from South Carolina, but that I don't know exactly how, although I do know it's close to, because they came to my grandmother's funeral, including Chief Blue of the South Carolina Catawbas. That was her cousin. So I have that. So I had this indigenous peoples ceremony. I'm the only one of my parents' children that had it, though. So there's a reason for that I'm sure is connected to this. I had this African naming ceremony. So I had no name for 10 days. On the 11th day is when I got my name. I was born on the 13th. The 11th day is the 24th. On the 24th, which is also the feast day of St. John the Baptist, my name was whispered in my ear by my father. He was the one who had chosen it and the only one who knew what it was up until that point, and whispered it to me in my ear. And from that day on, I was Mariama. Which is Mary, or Mary's real name. Her true original name is Mariama. So when women in Africa are named Mariama, although many of them are Islamic, Muslim, it is after her. Specifically after that Mary. It's not just any random Mary. It is Mary, the Madonna, who in Islam is considered one of the 4 special women. That space, that 4, it's only shared with one of Muhammad's daughters, his wife, 2 of his daughters, his wife, and Mary. That's it. Those are the 4 women. So that's what I meant about the period of 1119 and the Christians at that time. I see a lot of Christians and Muslims and Jews having all been intertwined. And it was not Christianity as it is today, but that makes sense because Jesus was Jewish. Jesus was a Palestinian Jew. His mother was. So that's what he was. Because in Jewish tradition, you are what your mother is. So he wasn't a Christian. And he worked with people who were not Jewish, so he worked with people who had no religion, were considered Gentile, or people who were considered Muslim also. So I think they were still doing that in 1119. And anyway, that's how it's all tied together. So, back to the feast day of St. John the Baptist. Mary, John's cousin to his mother, Elizabeth, first cousin to his mother, Elizabeth, is connected to him in that way. My mother's name happens to be John in Spanish, basically. Her name is Juanita. So that's John. And her middle name is Elizabeth, like John's mother. So we were all covered on that. I think it's all connected to the fact that was the name that I got my name and all that kind of stuff. So that's the personal bit for me. We're moving on to on the 27th, a few saints are celebrated. I'm not going to talk about them. On the 28th, however, it is the feast day of the Sacred Heart of Jesus, in addition to this other saint that I'm not going to talk about. We're going to talk about the Sacred Heart of Jesus for a moment. And on the 29th, the last day for which this reading is, it is both the Sacred Heart of Mary, or Immaculate Heart of Mary, and the feast day of Saints Peter and Paul, the apostles. They have their feast day together. So I'll go over those. There is nothing on the Jewish calendar I'm going to talk about until July 4th. July 4th. The Hebrew month of Tammuz begins for the year 5779. So we'll talk about that. I may mention at that time the start of the Islamic month, because that's the same thing, for the year 1440 or 144. That's another reason why I think that this year is so important, not just because it's 2019 or 1119, but because it's also 144 on the Islamic calendar, as in the 144,000 illumined ones, or lighted ones, or children of Abraham, the members of the 12 houses of Abraham. If I don't talk about the Muslim month, I won't be talking about anything Islamic of any seriousness for me until August 10th, which is the Hajj. And it's also Rosh Hashanah, I believe. So again, these things they're always on like the same day and stuff like that. All right. So the Christian calendar, and then we'll go to the celestial calendar, and that'll be it. So again, beginning on the 24th, Saint John the Baptist. It's called the Nativity of Saint John the Baptist, or the Solemnity of Saint John the Baptist, or the Solemnity of the Nativity of Saint John the Baptist. And again, the date is June 24th. I'm taking this from franciscanmedia.org. Jesus called John the greatest of all of those who preceded him. Quote, "I tell you, among those born of women, no one is greater than John." End quote. But John would have agreed completely with what Jesus added. Yet the least in the kingdom of God is greater than he. End quote. Speaking about himself, of course, Jesus. And that can be found in Luke 7:28. John spent his time in the desert like a hermit. He began to announce the coming of the kingdom and to call everyone to a fundamental reformation of life. His purpose was to prepare the way for Jesus. His baptism, he said, was for repentance. But one would come who would baptize with the Holy Spirit and fire. John was not yet, or not worthy even to untie his sandals, according to himself. His attitude toward Jesus was, quote, "He must increase, I must decrease," end quote. John 3:30 or 33, is representative of the ascended masters, which I've been seeing 3s and 7s all week everywhere. My gas yesterday was 33. I'm using my ascended master cards. John was humbled to find among the crowd of sinners who came to be baptized the one whom he already knew to be the Messiah. Quote, "I need to be baptized by you," end quote. Matthew 3:14. Of course, Revelations 3:14 is where Jesus calls himself Amen, like Amen Ra, or as in Amen Ra. He refers to himself. Tell them Amen said XYZ in a letter. But that's another story. So this is Matthew 3:14. But Jesus insisted, quote, "Allow it now, for thus it is fitting for us to fulfill all righteousness," end quote. Matthew 3:15. Jesus, true and humble human, as well as eternal God, was eager to do what was required of any good Jew. Jesus thus publicly entered the community of those awaiting the Messiah, but making himself part of that community. He made it truly messianic. Now, Isis does that too. If you know her story, which she told me herself, one example of that is she had come upon, when she was looking for Osiris's body, she had happened upon some girls by the beach, and their hair wasn't done. And so she stopped to do their hair, to comb it and wash it and whatever, and cornrow it and whatnot. And when they went back up to the castle, like they were part of the court, and the queen found out, she was like, well, go get the woman that you found by the beach, because I need her to work for me. I need her to be like my maid and stuff. And so Isis went, and she did operate basically as the woman's maid, knowing the whole time that Osiris's body coffin was part of a tree that was being used as part of a column for the castle itself, and that she was going to ultimately, of course, remove him from there. But she was humble and willing to be the maid first. Went on that one of the queen's children was extremely sickly, and she, Isis, in secret, went to heal the boy. And she took to this thing of spinning around super fast with the boy, which I've also seen her do. The 2 times only that I've seen her appear in a particular way to leave, she did this thing where she spun around real fast and she went like straight up. Anyway, she was spinning around with the boy, and his mother walked out to this patio where they were and broke Isis's like concentration, whatever spell she was working on, the thing she was doing, type of healing she was doing to this little boy, broke her concentration. The boy fell and died. But the queen was more so astonished that Isis had been more startled by the fact that more so than the incident that had occurred, that Isis had been there being her maid. And she, basically was like, oh, I'm sorry, like, Queen Isis, like, I need to be bowing to you. Like, you don't need to be bowing to me. You were here being my, like, please forgive me. And the woman ended up giving her other son to take with her. There's more to that, but it has nothing to do with this. But I just got reminded about that sort of, a person being met by this other, greatly spiritual being of the light, and that spiritual being recognizing them as, a spiritual being, not the same, but equal, equal in that we're both spiritual beings, and I respect you and your work too, which is another thing I think we need to be doing down here, a lot more of. Like, we have too many people fighting for number 1 spots in lanes in which they're incapable of even driving. You do what you do best. Let me do what I do best, because we're both meant to serve a purpose and to help like a greater good. But if you're fighting me to do what I do, or vice versa, then neither one of us is doing, is contributing. Anyway, back to this. The greatness of John, his pivotal place in the history of salvation, is seen in the great emphasis that Luke gives to the announcement of his birth at the event itself, both made prominently parallel to the same occurrences in the life of Jesus, just like I just made it parallel to the life of Isis. John attracted countless people to the banks of Jordan, and it occurred to some of the people that he might be the Messiah, but he constantly deferred to Jesus, even to sending away some of his followers to become the first disciples of Jesus. Perhaps John's idea of the coming of the kingdom of God was not being perfectly fulfilled in the public ministry of Jesus. For whatever reason, when he was in prison, he sent his disciples to ask Jesus if he was the Messiah. Jesus' answer showed that the Messiah was to be a figure like that of the suffering servant in Isaiah. John himself would share in the pattern of messianic suffering, losing his life to the revenge of Herodias. That is another interesting story. If you've never heard it or read it, I recommend it for people who are interested in stuff like that. John was beheaded at the behest of like a foolish whim of a spoiled girl. It was ego that got him killed. And speaking of that, to go back to the Teutonic Knights, their base in Jerusalem was in an old mosque. So again, that to intertwine all the religions, it was in an old mosque that was believed to be sitting atop the Temple of Solomon and containing I'm sure it was pretty grand, some sort of box that was believed to have had the head of John the Baptist in it. So to come full circle. John challenges us Christians to the fundamental attitude of Christianity: total dependence on the Father in Christ. Except for the Mother of God, no one had a higher function in the unfolding of salvation. Yet, the least in the kingdom, Jesus said, is greater than he. For the pure gift that the Father gives, the attractiveness as well as the austerity of John, his fierce courage in denouncing evil, all stem from his fundamental and total placing of his life within the will of God. And then to talk about also Jesus going on about his suffering, there are only two beings in the Abrahamic scriptures in the Bible referred to as the long suffering. One is Jesus, the other is Archangel Michael, who is the only being also who is referred to in the scriptures as not only an archangel, but the archangel. The others are referred to as angels. So just to give you some needless trivia that you may need one day. So the next is the Sacred Heart of Jesus. And for that, I just went to wikipedia.org to give you a quick synopsis. The Feast of the Most Sacred Heart of Jesus is a solemnity in the liturgical calendar of the Roman Catholic Church. It falls 19 days after the Pentecost on a Friday. I put emphasis on the 19th, those of you who are watching me for the first time, because like 11/19, 19 in general is a number that I've been telling of the attachment and the association to this journey since 2016 when it was shown to me. So yes, falls 19 days after the Pentecost on a Friday. The earliest possible date that the Feast of the Sacred Heart could be held on is May 29th, as in 1818, which is 99, another number I've spoken about many times, and 2285, in the year 2285, if we make it that far, it will occur again that the Feast of the Sacred Heart will be on May 29th. 2285, of course, contains Master number 22, which is 1304 or 1111, as well as 85, which is also 1304 or 1111. So it's like from 1818 to 1313, if your mind works the way mine does. The latest possible date that this thing can occur, this event can occur, the Sacred Heart of Jesus in general, on the calendar, is July 2nd, as it was in 1943, and will be again in the year 2038. 2038 is 1111. Right, 2002 is 11, and 38 is 11. The devotion to the Sacred Heart is one of the most widely practiced and well-known Roman Catholic devotions, taking Jesus Christ's physical heart as the representation of his divine love for humanity. So that's what that feast day is about. It goes into the history of it for those who want to read further. And usually tells, I don't see it glancing at it right now, but usually tells like what countries practice it and observe it rather. So the next day, the 29th, is the Feast of the Immaculate Heart or Sacred Heart of Mary. And for that, we'll also go to wikipedia.org. The Immaculate Heart of Mary is a devotional name used to refer to the interior life of the Blessed Virgin Mary, her joys and sorrows, her virtues and hidden perfections, and above all, her virginal love for God the Father, her maternal love for her Son, Jesus, and her compassionate love for all people. The Eastern Catholic churches occasionally utilize the image, devotion, and theology associated with the Immaculate Heart of Mary. However, this is a cause of some controversy, some seeing it as a form of liturgical Latinization. Oh, we don't want to make this Latin. We got to keep it European, right? Meanwhile, it's African anyway, which is closer to Latin. The Roman Catholic Church, in any case, and the Roman Catholic view is based on Mariology, as in, Mariama, Mariology, Mariology, as exemplified by Pope John Paul in his apostolic letter. So it's still something way beyond the original beginnings of any of this, coming after the Catholic Church and Christianity as a whole was established and built by man, not having anything to do with the Spirit, as like an institution. Anyway, he wrote this letter that stated how it had to be practiced, and I guess by to whom it should be attributed. Traditionally, the heart is depicted pierced with 7 wounds or swords, in homage to the 7 dolours of Mary. Also, roses or another type of flower may be wrapped around her heart, or the heart. And this too goes on to talk about why and where in the scriptures you can find reason for this. You know what? I'll go over that part actually. In chapter 2 of St. Luke's Gospel, excuse me, the evangelist twice reports that Mary kept all things in her heart, that there she might ponder over them. Luke 2:35 recounts the prophecy of Simeon that her heart would be pierced with a sword. Excuse me. The image that the pierced heart is the most popular representation of the Immaculate Heart. St. John's Gospel further invited attention to Mary's heart with its depiction of Mary at the foot of the cross at Jesus' crucifixion. St. Augustine said of this, that Mary was not merely passive at the foot of the cross. Quote, she cooperated through charity in the work of our redemption, end quote. St. Leo said that through faith and love, she conceived her son spiritually, even before receiving him into her womb. And St. Augustine tells that she was more blessed in having born Christ in her heart than in having conceived him in the flesh. And goes on to talk about other saints that are associated with this and more of the original origins of the feast day. I do see one date jumping out at me already, and it is in its principle object. This feast is identical with the feast of the Inner Life of Mary, celebrated by the Sulpicans on October 19th. So October 19th is another feast day. And actually I see a reminder that in 2015, this feast day was held on landed on June 13th, which is also a feast day of Our Lady of Fatima. The biggest, most celebrated feast day of Our Lady of Fatima, because it is every 13th from May 13th through October 13th. But June 13th is the date on which the townspeople were invited to witness basically her visitation upon them. So that means that this feast day, the Sacred Heart of Mary, and Our Lady of Fatima would have occurred on the same day in 2015, and it looks like they will again in 2026, also be on June 13th, which is my birthday. As I started out in the beginning of the conversation, I was born on the 13th. I got my name on the 24th. So coming full circle yet again. For more on that, I'm sure there's many places you can find it, not just Wikipedia. Wikipedia is probably the least of the places you can find it. Also on that day, same day as the Sacred Heart of Mary, is the Solemnity of Saints Peter and Paul. And for that, I've gone back to franciscanmedia.org. St. Mark ends the first half of his gospel with a triumphant climax. He has recorded doubt, misunderstanding, and the opposition of many to Jesus. Now Peter makes his great confession of faith. Quote, "You are the Messiah," Mark 8:29. It was one of the many glorious moments in Peter's life, beginning with the day that he was called from his nets along the Sea of Galilee to become a fisher of men for Jesus. The New Testament clearly shows Peter as the leader of the apostles, chosen by Jesus to have a special relationship with him. With James and John, he was privileged to witness the Transfiguration. The Transfiguration is the day that it appeared on Mount Sinai, Jesus alongside Elijah and Moses. That's the Transfiguration. And also they got to witness the raising of a dead child to life and the agony in Gethsemane. His mother-in-law was cured by Jesus. He was sent with John to prepare for the Passover, the last Passover before Jesus' death. His name is first on every list of apostles. I think Mary Magdalene should be, but that's another story too. I think she was the most important apostle. Her books were destroyed or, hidden away. Something else that happened with, these popes and King James and all of that. Anyway, and to Peter only did Jesus say, quote, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my heavenly Father. And so I say to you, you are Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church." I'm getting chills on the left side only. "And the gates of the netherworld shall not prevail against it. I will give you the keys to the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, as above, so below. And whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven." End quote. Matthew 16:17 through 19. But the Gospels prove their own trustworthiness by the unflattering details that they include about Peter. He clearly had no public relations person. It is a great comfort for ordinary mortals to know that Peter also has his human weaknesses, even in the presence of Jesus. As I was saying, we're all human, so we're all similar in that respect at least. We're all the same, even if, we're all equal in that. He generously gave up all things, yet he asked in a childish self-regard, quote, "What are we going to get for all this?" End quote. And to find out about, or to see that, you can check out Matthew 19:27, which is another 19 on in and of itself. He receives the full force of Christ's anger when he objects to the idea of a suffering Messiah. Quote, "Get behind me, Satan. You are an obstacle to me. You are thinking not as God does, but as human beings do." End quote. That was Jesus to Peter saying, "You're being way too 3D for me right now, and I can't deal." Matthew 16:23. Peter is willing to accept Jesus' doctrine of forgiveness. You know what? That takes me back, just for a second, that takes me back to the minor or partial rant that I started to go on about people not being in their lane because they're looking for what they're going to get, and so they want to be number one at everything, even what they're not meant here to do. Well, they're not here to do. What am I going to get is always the first thought. And until we get out of that, until we step out of ego and move towards spiritual, stop thinking like man and start thinking like God, we're going to be, trapped here. Peter is willing to accept Jesus' doctrine of forgiveness, but he suggests a limit of 7 times. He walks on water in faith, but sinks in doubt, right? Jesus said, come on, you can do it too. Let me teach you how to walk on water. And he went out, and then all of a sudden he let go of the intention. Right? In order to manifest something, we have to hold fast to the intention. Peter let go of it. He lost the faith part. I always talk about the steps of manifestation. Number 1 is the thought and the words that we speak over ourselves. 2 is faith. We have to have the faith, believe that this thing will come to pass. 3, we begin to see it taking form, but it requires patience, because we got to make it to 4 still. 4, we're on solid ground. And that is the cycle of manifestation as taught to you by Queen of Swords, the Lightworker. But that's what's coming up here. Peter lost that too. He lost that faith, and that's why he fell in the water. He refuses to let Jesus wash his feet, but then he wants his whole body cleansed. He swears at the Last Supper that he will never deny Jesus, and then swears to a servant maid that he has never known the man. He loyally resists the first attempt to arrest Jesus by cutting off Malchus's ear, but in the end, he runs away with the others. In the depth of his sorrow, Jesus looks on him and forgives him, and he goes out and sheds bitter tears. The risen Jesus told Peter to feed his lambs and his sheep. John 21:15 through 17. Paul, if the most well-known preacher today suddenly began preaching that the United States should adopt Marxism and not rely on the Constitution, the angry reaction would help us to understand Paul's life when he started preaching that Christ alone can save us. He had been the most Pharisaic of the Pharisees, the most legalistic of the Mosaic lawyers, and now suddenly he appears to other Jews as this heretic, welcomer of Gentiles, a traitor, and an apostate. Paul's central conviction was simple and absolute. Only God can save humanity. No human effort, even the most scrupulous observance of law, can create a human good which we can bring to God as reparation for sin and payment for grace. And that again speaks to what we need to do now. Only with us thinking and living like gods and goddesses, lowercase g, can we bring this stuff about. If we want to follow man's law, then and live in by man's restrictions and being obsessed with what man says we need to get by, like money instead of manifestation, which is of God, and the types of the ways that gods and goddesses move about, then that's on us basically. Same thing Peter and Paul taught. Excuse me. He spoke of how only God can do any of this stuff. To be saved from itself, from sin, from the devil, and from death, humanity must open itself completely to the saving power, he said, of Jesus. Paul never lost his love for his Jewish family, though he carried on a lifelong debate with them about the uselessness of the law without Christ, or basically without God. He reminded the Gentiles that they were grafted on the parent stock of the Jews, who were still God's chosen people, the children of the promise. So here, again, to tie it back into the other things that I mentioned, without this being in mind, getting back to the 12 families of Abraham, those are the original children of God, according to, many things or many people's beliefs. And that's what this is speaking about too. The original children of God. It's not just Jews and the way that we see it and believe it today. First of all, to give you an example of what I mean and why I even say this, we use a term when people are being bigoted against Jews. We use a term called anti-Semitic. Well, anti-Semitic came to be a term because Semites are actually people. Semites are actually people. They were actually, true Jews carrying this bloodline. But they're not European. They were African. So how can you be anti-Semitic against somebody who's not a Semite? That this is, again, getting into what God or the spirit realms, the universe planned, and what man has planned and created. It's two different worlds. So we got to step into the one of the spiritual, beginning with ourselves, accepting yourself as this, again, God, goddess, lowercase g. We would probably go to confession to Peter sooner than to any of the other apostles. He is perhaps the most striking example of the simple fact of holiness. Jesus says to us, as he said, in effect, to Peter, quote, "It is not you who have chosen me, but I who have chosen you. Peter, it is not human wisdom that makes it possible for you to believe, but my Father's revelation. I, not you, build my church," end quote. Paul's experience of the risen Jesus on the road to Damascus was the driving force that made him one of the most zealous, dynamic, and courageous ambassadors of the church that it's ever had. But persecution, humiliation, and weakness became his day-by-day carrying of the cross, material for further transformation. The dying Christ was in him. The living Christ was his life. Saint Paul is the patron saint of Greece. And they don't say who Saint or one of the patron saints, because so is Saint Joseph of like the priesthood. And from there we'll go to the planetary calendar. So this period, the 25th through the 23rd through the 29th. So on June 24th, we start at 2:28 p.m. with Jupiter quincux the true node currently Cancer. June 25th at 9:10 a.m., Uranus quintile the true node. June 26th at 8:19 p.m. There's a lot of 19s in what I'm going over now too, by the way, that I haven't mentioned. Mercury enters Leo. That's the one I'm going to talk about, actually. And that is the last for the week. Mercury in Leo. Proud, lively, bold. We should all be ready to roar when messenger planet Mercury moves into loving Leo. This dynamic partnership signals a time when we'll all feel a greater need to speak from the heart and to make ourselves heard loud and clear. It should also come as no surprise that communication becomes a lot more straightforward during this transit. Since fiery Leo is known for pure and enthusiastic self-expression, language can also get a lot more colorful during Mercury in Leo. The lion loves to elaborate displays and has Mercury on its side to help to add a touch of flair to the things that we say. Who need facts and figures when you can make a big splash instead? Yep, that's the Leo influence hard at work during this transit. Well, I can imagine we Geminis are going to be in rare form with Mercury being our ruler, Mercury the communication planet, being the ruler of Gemini, the great communicator, and Leo being our third house of communication. With all these converging upon each other, I'm sure we will be very colorful, very interesting. When Mercury is in Leo, I was about to say when Leo is in Mercury. Fire sign Leo is all about direct communication, so we won't hold back when Mercury and Leo team up. If something has been on our mind and we've been too intimidated to say it, this is the time when we'll finally have the guts to speak up. Just be careful, because Mercury is speedy and Leo is expressive. So words can come flying out of our mouths. That's very Gemini. A little too well, it says. Mercury in Leo gives us a license to thrill. Leo is one of the most entertaining and high impact zodiac signs, so we can expect a lot of jokes and laughter during this transit. An added benefit, Leo is social, meaning there will be plenty of lighthearted and witty banter to go around. Think of the confident lion, the mane blowing in the wind, strutting its stuff. This is our time to shine. We'll all adopt some of that self-assured swagger, making it easier to get up in front of a crowd and to put ourselves out there. If we've been putting off any speaking engagements, Mercury in Leo would be the perfect time to finally go through with it. Our creative juices could just start flowing when Mercury is in Leo. This is an opportunity to channel all of Leo's passions and enthusiasm into our artistic pursuit of some kind. We might find ourselves picking up those paintbrushes and dusting off our cameras so that we can get out there and create. This year is about create. Anyway, it is a 3, 2019 equals 3, all about creativity, the creator, abundance, fertility, mother, love, money, ascendant masters. That's what the 3 is. So it's the perfect time. Mercury retrograde we don't have to talk about that. Mercury will not be retrograde. Oh, will it? Wait a minute. I think it will, actually. Mercury is about to go retrograde again. So let me talk about this part. Mercury retrograde is quite a production when it's in Leo, or on its own. But when it's in theatrical Leo, you can expect it to really put on a show. While Mercury retrogrades in this bold and brash sign, it inspires us to express ourselves with a new sense of urgency and drama. We need to watch out for an over-the-top style of communication during this Mercury retrograde. This may also be a time when we take our ideas and promote them as though we are the ultimate answer to life itself. We can become more strong-willed than usual, attempting to push our beliefs onto other people. That's very Leo. And I say that as lovingly as I can, as a Leo rising myself and the daughter of a Leo, but man, they are pushy and... yeah, like the center of the world. Anyway, this kind of overbearing approach, yes, that's a perfect word for it, might ruffle a few feathers, and we'd be wise to temper our impression of how important we are in the context of the world around us. Right? You are but a mustard seed. It goes on to talk about if you were born with Mercury in Leo, and some Mercury in Leo traits are things like confident, enthusiastic, dramatic, authoritative, direct, persuasive, warm, playful, and creative. And on that note, I think I will end this video and come back and read the cards. So I hope you'll join me again. Namaste.